Well, everybody, it's great to have another guest with us on Good Morning Market. I should have had this lady on earlier. Some of y'all may be intimately familiar with Creative Coast and the amazing work that they've been doing in the growing coastal empire for years. If not, I'm very happy to be the guy who gets to introduce you to Jen Bonnet and her impact. So, who is this lady? She is a serial tech entrepreneur, chief technology officer, and entrepreneurial ecosystem builder focused on helping entrepreneurs launch, grow, and scale technology businesses. Jennifer serves technology entrepreneurs in the Savannah, Georgia region through her role as the director of the Creative Coast. Jennifer serves female tech entrepreneurs globally through Startup Chicks, an organization she launched back in 2008 and is relaunching in early 2023. Jennifer is also the chief product and technology officer for the Kona Exchange. Kona is a digital currency exchange focused on providing a means for businesses that relies heavily on cash to transact digitally in a private, secure, and trustful manner. It currently is in private beta. And then prior to these roles, Jennifer was the director of the Advanced Technology Development Center, ATDC, Georgia, and the Tech Incubator, a top 12 incubators changing the world, according to Forbes magazine. When she was there, Jennifer spearheaded the development of a recurring year-round curriculum, statewide expansion, the Accelerate program, and growing the number of physical incubatees from 19 to 90 companies. That was a mouthful because I've got a guest with quite the reputation. Jen, thank you for joining Good Morning Market with me.
Thanks for having me here. It's great to be here.
So I get to talk about a really fun conversation with you today, of which you are very familiar. Like you said, you work with tech companies. They have unique needs as an industry. They really have unique needs and challenges and risk factors when it comes to funding. And I went to the great 2022 Grit Conference, which used to be known as Geekend. So I was there in the winter, and one of the themes around which we were all able to Congress together and really do a lot of learning and getting expertise was around business funding. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that topic with you here.
I'm happy to be here and look forward to chatting. I do think it's interesting, right? Because you mentioned tech as being high risk. I actually think smaller businesses, from my perspective, are higher risk. So
True.
I think it depends on your viewpoint, really, as to what risk is and how risky things are.
That's true. That's true. So, I mean, none of this audience is afraid of risk. I think that's just naturally the demographic that this content attracts. We're all burn the boats. We can make it happen. A bunch of dreamers who are winging it until we figure it out. But that money thing, tends to get in the way. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. I do want to take a step back. I don't want to take it for granted that people know the Creative Coast. That's how I first met you. You're the executive director, and you've been in that role for 5 years. Could you quickly just summarize for us what is the Creative Coast and what is its mission in the coastal region?
Sure. So the Creative Coast is a 27-year-old nonprofit organization that was launched and is primarily funded by the Savannah Economic Development Authority, the city of Savannah, and at this point, Georgia Southern University is one of our largest sponsors as well. And we're created to catalyze the innovation economy in Savannah, Georgia. And what that really means is this intersection. The founders were very, very forward thinking in this idea of, hey, there's going to be a white collar work class, and they're going to be able to kind of choose where they want to live. And we could cultivate Savannah into being this place for at the time was knowledge-based workers. Today we would call them remote workers, right?
Yeah.
And it's this intersection of people that, it's in essence make a living on their laptop, creatives, entrepreneurs, and technologists that now, and especially now it's been expedited with COVID, can choose where they want to live, work, and play, and work for a customer base that is global. Yep. And that's what it focuses on. So we provide we do education and social programs. 4 to 6 events a month, as well as some certain marquee events that we have, as you mentioned, the Grit Conference, where we try and bring together like-minded people that are either creatives, techies, or entrepreneurs. And sometimes we want them all in one room, and sometimes we want to divide up the tribes and let them be amongst their people, because they don't always communicate well. Like we had an event last Tuesday where we brought the C-Spot marketing meetup group to the Techie Tuesday meetup group, and they were all at the same place, but they were still on opposite side of the room. So, gotta get people to mingle. So,
yes.
but yeah, ultimately we believe that, taking an entrepreneur, a creative, and a techie and putting them in the same room could make magic happen, right? Could mean, get you the contractor or the freelance talent that you need to help scale and grow your business, right? And the bigger we grow the businesses, the better jobs we create in Savannah, Georgia for the long run. And that's why CETA is interested, right? From an economic development perspective. These are typically high wage jobs, right? And so can we grow and scale high wage jobs that are clean for the economy or environment, right? They're made on a laptop and, provide a diverse industry base in Savannah, Georgia, less dependent on tourism, less dependent on manufacturing logistics.
No, I think that's perfect. And I think that for those who don't already know Creative Coast, if they don't get to know Creative Coast very soon, they're going to see its impact. Because like you said, even before COVID, you are doing perfect work. But obviously the pandemic and then obviously a lot of the economic major developments that have happened in this region are going to expedite the transformation of this economy, and then the need for the skill sets that y'all directly serve and cater to and attract and recruit. So I'm very excited to see and be in participation of the kind of change that y'all are generating. Because like you said, Savannah has been a great market for a long time because of tourism and the ports and Gulfstream and healthcare and the U.S. Army and all those things. I want those to continue to grow. But like you said, in today's economy, we are getting more versatile, more high speed, and we have lots of remote laptop class workers who are going to need the kind of resources that y'all provide. And maybe you could just quickly plug, I don't want to steal thunder from the end of the conversation, but y'all do have like memberships where people can do like job postings. You have access to really great facilities over there at Expansive. Like, you could tell me a little bit about the membership with Creative Coast.
Sure. Yeah, we have 2 different membership tiers. It starts at a whopping $30 a month. That gets you a discount to all of our all of our programs. So pretty much most of our education and social programs are going to be free to what we call club member. And then that also gets you access to our conference rooms in our space. So I think it's 2 hours a month free conference room space, which if you've ever tried to rent a conference room in this town, it's at least $30 an hour. So
exactly.
And then we have a $99 a month membership for folks, and then they can come in and co-work with us 2 days a week. Our office is really cool, nice space, Class A office space at the corner of Bull and Bryan. It is on the dot line. For those that don't want to pay for parking, you can get dropped off free at our front door. And that gets you, again, 8 hours a day, 2 days a week, plus 4 hours of conference room time to come in and hang out. It also will give you discounts to our marquee programs like She Hustles, which is an event that we hold 3 times a year for female entrepreneurs. The last one sold out. So over 130 women came together in a hot evening in I guess, the end of May to celebrate women entrepreneurs. It gives you a discount to Grit, which, we had a 300-person conference for 2 days back in January that we're just starting to plan the next one. It's probably going to be February this coming year because so the holidays was really challenging for us.
Right.
And so those things you get really, really cheap discounted tickets for if you're a member. The other thing to think about is that we are a 501c3, so the membership dues can be deducted as a donation during taxes.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for giving us that recap. Because like I said, I think it's going to be really helpful to our audience. I think there's going to be a lot of crossover with what Creative Coast does and the Good Morning Market audience. So that said, we now need to get into the meat, and I'm really excited to get into it. I did a little bit of homework just to be able to ask not stupid questions and hopefully ask somewhat helpful questions so you can then get us the best insights. Something that I think a lot of people would know is, most small businesses fail. So I looked up a stat, which I think is reasonably accurate, is 50% of businesses fail by year 5. Okay. I did look up a source from CB Insights that said the second most common cause for that failure would be lack of capital. Number 1 being just lack of market demand. But number 2 is this lack of capital, lack of funding. From your experience working with the innovation sector, tech companies, have you seen this to be the case, that lack of capital is a big reason why a lot of them don't make it? I'm not sure if you have a story or just what is your perspective on how impactful capital is for those companies that don't make it past year 5?
Yeah, my notes from my conversation with you previously was like, I wonder who CB Insights asked. Because, the truth is most entrepreneurs that go through a failure may say lack of capital, but is it lack of capital or is it lack of planning for when you need the capital, right? So
chicken or the egg, or is that a symptom or is that a root cause?
I think it's a challenge, right? Raising capital for your business is not like, oh, I'm going to need capital for payroll in 2 weeks, I'm going to go raise capital, right? Raising capital for your business is like a 6-month journey, right? So if you're not planning for it, then you could very likely fail, right? And so I think it's understanding the cycle, your financial cycle of your own individual business, what your spend's like, and and identifying capital sources that can fill in the gaps when you need them, and know that they're there before you need them, right? And so, I do think, my very first startup was huge, right? Big. I wrote a search engine, right? And we raised a ton of money, right? And at the end of the day, you could say we failed, but we sold the company because we couldn't raise. We knew far enough ahead of time that we needed to raise capital, right? That we tried to raise capital, but we were also ad revenue. So this is 2001, 2002, the dot-com crash is happening. Nobody's spending money on advertising anymore. So our revenues drop. So now we're not in a position to raise money because the world has changed and our revenues have dropped. And we don't know when the revenues are going to come back up because it's internet advertising and nobody's ever been through this type of thing before. And so we couldn't raise money. But we went to one of our partners that we actually had a relationship with, a peer company that was similar but different, and said, hey, our technologies are compatible. What we do is compatible. What would you think about a merger acquisition? And we were able to sell the company, and the company continued, right? But that was because we knew what our runway was, right? And we knew what happened. And even as the world was crashing, right, we knew, right? So I think, especially at times like economic turmoil, like what happened at the dot-com crash, what happened in the 2008, 2009 mortgage crisis, what happened at the beginning of COVID, right? And honestly, in some ways, a lot of what's happening now, right? There's certainly a capital tightening in the market. It is harder to get an SBA loan or to raise venture capital than it has been in a decade right now. And you may not have expected that because it wasn't so hard a year ago. So you should be planning now for the capital needs that you're going to have in 6 months to a year. You should understand what your cash flow looks like, what your runway is. And have a plan, right, to make sure that doesn't end your business, right? And sometimes I think that comes down to, always making sure you have some time to work on the business, not in the business, right? So can you just clear 4 hours on a Friday afternoon to say, I'm going to step away from being in the weeds to focus on the strategy and look at the big picture? Am I still doing the right things? Are we still doing the right things, right? What should I be worried about in the next quarter, in the next 6 months? Can I and we get really caught up as an entrepreneur myself
Yeah.
in the weeds of the business. And sometimes it's really hard to do that. So I almost think you have to schedule it.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think that has actually been a theme through many of my wisest guests is you do have to get out of the constant wheel turning of working in the business versus on the business. And maybe that is, like you said, maybe that is part of the reason we see this, a stat like, lack of capital reason for lots of businesses failing. Was it because they were so busy making widgets and all of a sudden they're like weeks out and like, oh yeah, man, I need cash flow, I need capital, versus the smart way to raise capital, raise funds, is to be getting outside of your business, actually sitting and strategizing and doing long-term budgeting to give yourself sufficient runway in order to get the right kind of capital at the right, time on the right terms. That way you don't find yourself chasing your tail, because like you said, it may be by the time you get to that point, it's too late.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of planning that's involved here. And then, there's lots of different ways to get capital too, right?
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you next, is just for those of us, who are listening, I believe most of us would know at a basic level that there are three major categories for getting capital for your business. You can bootstrap it, which I think lots of folks know the gist of bootstrapping. You can get, conventional loans, which I actually have interviewed, for example, the Small Business Assistance Corporation. So that's part of their modus operandi, is working with community banks and federal programs to help small businesses, even if they traditionally couldn't get a loan, be able to get them loan and capital. And then there's investors. Could you maybe give us the lay of the land, or do you see one method being more involved frequently when it comes to it's really aligned with a lot of successes, or maybe it's aligned with a lot of failures?
Yeah. So I will start with, I did a podcast, a lunchtime topic for the Creative Coast during COVID called Show Me the Money. I'll encourage you to go look it up if you're interested. Okay. But I identified over 20 ways to fund your business.
Yeah, I would not be able to think of half of that. So yeah.
Right. And so some of it would fall into the bootstrapping category, right? And especially while you're getting your business off the ground, can you extend your runway? Right. So that might be driving Uber at night. Right. That might be renting out your car through one of those daily car rentals. That might be Airbnb-ing a room in your house. Right. So, first you think about, like, how do I extend the runway? How do I get my business off the ground? And it's a different world. Like I did my very first startup, I did rent out a room. I did sell my really nice car. I did all these things to last for 18 months without a salary. Right. And so I think it's important to think about that, right? So how do you extend your runway? And that's a bootstrap method, right? And then once you start having a real business and start having customers and earning money, there's ways to leverage that cash, even in a long, purchasing order situation, right? So if you've got a sales order out to a client and they're a bigger customer and it takes them 30 days to pay and you need money today, you can sell that cash flow and get the money today, and you'll have to probably give up 10%, but if you need the money today, right? So there's there's 20 some different ways, right? That's right. And then the very last one is angel or venture capital, right? So there's all these different ways to raise money. And so I think it always depends on where you are in the life cycle of your business. Like, so when you're first starting out, bootstrapping, even for big tech companies, is the 99.99% way to do it, right?
Yeah.
So right. And then when you start getting customers and you start to get to that, dare I say, product market fit stage, where you're starting to make some money and see some customer traction, that gives you other opportunities, whether it is debt, whether it is cash flow financing, whether it is, working with a specific customer to maybe do customer funded development because they have needs that your solution doesn't solve yet, but they're on your product roadmap. So maybe they prepay you for those, right? All the way up to venture and equity, angel capital, right? Remember, less than 2% of all businesses, about 2% of all businesses will receive some sort of angel or venture capital. Okay. Right. And that is selling percentages of your business for money, right?
How many businesses would you venture to say are seeking out that kind of investment?
Well, so that I think it's a misnomer, right? Because I think a lot of companies think they should seek it. And a lot of companies I meet with are like, okay, so like you want venture capital or angel capital, great. So in 5 to 10 years, you're going to sell your company for I don't know, 30 times multiple. And they're like, no, I never want to sell. I'm like, okay, then you shouldn't go for that type of funding, right?
Right.
So there's this
Right.
misnomer. Right. And it's like, okay, if you want to run this, if you honestly believe you're going to run this business for the rest of your life, then venture is not on the table for you.
Now,
Right.
would angel investing
It could
potentially be?
be,
Because I think a
right?
lot of us don't maybe might assume that those are interchangeable, angel investing versus venture
So they're
capital. Yeah.
not, right?
Right.
So venture capital is a professional investor investing in your company with other people's money, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've
Mm-hmm.
raised money into a fund and they're funding your business, right? Angel capital is an individual with a high net worth investing in your business, right? And while they will get a percentage of sales, typically, or a percentage of your company for doing this, there are other ways to structure the deal with the individual angel. As I mentioned, as I slipped up there, you
Yeah.
could structure it for a percentage of sales. Oh, you're going to give me this much money and you get a percent of revenue on an ongoing basis, right?
Right.
You could do it as a note. You could do it as a debt. You could do it as a loan. We're going to pay you back, right? And that is more of a individual angel. You've met this high net worth individual that believes in you and your business, that's, can add value to your business, and then you can discuss, okay, what mechanism should we use to fund the business?
And certain angels may want to get into that because they want you to sell the company for 30 times multiple. Other angels might genuinely believe that, in your organization, so they're going to get a certain equity or certain terms, but they don't want you to sell the company per se.
Yeah, and I think, that most angels that everyone knows about are truly the angels that like are expecting equity in your company and want a return, right?
Yeah.
And so, but anybody with a high net worth, like anybody that, the according to the federal government, in order to be able to invest as an angel investor, you have to either have $1 million net worth outside of your home, so not including your home, $1 million net worth, or make $250,000 a year. So if you find one of those people and they want to invest in your business, they are legally allowed to invest in your business, right? So there are some, parameters around that. But I will say, like, one of the questions you asked me was, which do I see more frequently being involved in successes and failures, right? So when I think of most of the companies I worked with back in Atlanta that, went on to become a unicorn, $1 billion company, and, there's 4 or 5 of them at this point. It's all 3.
Really? They would use combinations.
So they bootstrap to a certain point, right? To get to the point where they had a product in the market so that they could start to show product market fit. And then, like, what you don't really hear that much about is, like, when you read in TechCrunch or somewhere online that somebody just closed a $75 million round, it's typically not 100% equity. Right. So this is one of the things that Silicon Valley did really well. It probably got them into trouble a little bit, but really well. They'd help you raise money. They'd introduce you to investors, and you'd raise maybe 25 million in equity, and they'd give you a $50 million line of credit, equity, debt, venture debt, they call it, right, to match that, and that's how you got to 75 million, right? So, and this is where they got into trouble in some ways, that they made you, in order to give you the debt, they made you keep all your money in that bank. And of course, only $250,000 is FDIC insured. So money then was insured, and that's how we got into trouble there. But most companies that I've worked with that get to be really successful use, all 3 options.
Okay. Is it really like seasonal? Like at first, okay, you're bootstrapping, you need to show that you can stand on your own 2 feet. and maybe a conventional loan comes next for working capital, and then maybe investor of some sort comes in, or maybe as investor would be next before working
Yeah.
capital. I don't know.
The investor comes before the working capital, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So once you get to the point where you can kind of model out your finances for real, I teach financial models in our Idea Accelerated Bootcamp, right? But we're modeling out a 5-year financial plan with a bunch of hypotheses that we've tested through a series of interviews. We haven't put a product in front of the customer yet. So, once you can get to the point where you can literally forecast sales and revenue, then you can go for a cash flow loan, right?
Right.
Or for those that are e-commerce, totally different business, right? But, a lot of direct to consumer products or e-commerce businesses do use more cash flow funding, right? So once they start selling on Amazon, or they start selling on Shopify direct to consumer, and they're able to model out like how much inventory they need at any given point in time, because the key to their businesses is not running out of inventory, right? They can take cash flow loans against their inventory orders, right, to pace them up, right, until they get to the size that typically a private equity company would be interested in direct to consumer, right?
Okay.
So you don't really think of traditionally venture capitalists have not gone after direct to consumer. That has changed a little bit. We've seen some venture capital investors in direct to consumer in the last 5 years. But with the slowdown, I think we're seeing it almost return to normal, where an e-commerce or direct to consumer business would focus on building their product, selling it through their online channels. They have to deal with some sort of funding mechanism to fund inventory, which is some sort of funding mechanism there, which would traditionally be more like an SBA or a traditional bank loan, or some of these new online providers like Bluevine that has popped up that are really good at that and do use slightly different algorithms to figure out how much you can take, right? And then they would scale to a point where they become attractive to a private equity firm versus a venture firm.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Just, I know that it sounds like, I'm oversimplifying it, because like I said, if you really think about it, there's 20 plus ways. And I do want to point the audience towards the discussion, the speech that you gave through Creative Coast. I believe it's on YouTube, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay.
But you can find it on the Creative Coast too. So if you go to the Creative Coast website and you click on online resources, you're going to see all of our classes that we've taught since COVID started. So there's, I believe, over 300 workshops online at this point. Okay.
So that said, I will kind of ask, for my own sake, the simple question is, if we're looking at, I understand, like in general, I feel like with Bootstrap, there's the obvious benefit is, there's no other third parties that you're beholden to. You obviously retain all your equity. You're not paying loans with interest, but the drawback is obviously you're having to draw from personal lines, you're having to go to family or friends or whatnot, and it's obviously smaller pools of cash that are harder to put into a company. When a company gets enough of success to stand on their own two legs, and they've bootstrapped it to a point, and they're like, okay, maybe I should look at an investor or an angel or a loan. What's like one benefit or danger that business owners need to be mindful of when they start to look at those outside parties for funding?
Yeah. So I would say, like, if you're bootstrapping a business and you get to a certain stage, the question is, it really, as to whether or not you seek funding, is about growth and how fast you want to grow, right? The capital is really about growing fast. Like, how fast can you grow, right? And in certain businesses, if you don't add money, right, and you just keep sort of going along, even if you're cash flow positive and you're making money and you're like really super stoked, because you can have a $3 million a year 6-person business, right? Totally possible, right? But if you're in a space where somebody might go get capital and they could knock you out because of a marketing campaign, you got to go for capital. So think of the bootstrapped, low capital intensive software company that starts in a town like Savannah. I actually have a couple in the back of my mind, but don't necessarily want to say their names out loud because they might get mad at me. right? They grow to a certain stage. They're making it work. They've got customers. In fact, they got a lot of customers. They're making $6-10 million a year, and they got a great lifestyle here in our beautiful city, right? And a small team that's fun and easy to manage and all this stuff, right? But they're in an industry, you know, I don't know, some sort of SaaS-based industry, software as a service-based industry, property tech, something like that, real estate tech. And somebody on the West Coast decides to go after this space and raises $10 million. And they don't even have a good product yet, but they've raised $10 million. So they're going to have a good product, right? And they're going to spend over half of that money on marketing. They're going to be everywhere. They're going to be on television commercials. They're going to be sponsoring golf tournaments, right? Where your customers, your current customers and your future customers might see them. So if you don't raise money, but a competitor does, you're SOL. You could be out of business. You could have had first mover advantage.
Yep.
Right? And lost it, right?
Yep.
Mint versus Wasabi. You know who mint.com is, right?
Yep.
Have you ever heard of Wasabi?
Never.
So they did what Mint did prior to Mint existing, but they focused on building all their own tech and kind of moving slow, and they had a great platform. But Mint said, you know what? We don't need to build a platform. We just need to have customer adoption and win the customer race. And we're going to have a super user-friendly, easy-to-use program. And boom, you don't ever hear anything about Wasabi anymore.
Right.
So I think it's really important for you to think about in a global economy, even if you're a business in Savannah, Georgia, you know, in a global economy, and you don't raise funds, is that a risk for you? Because it could be.
Yeah. No, that's the thing is, I think I'm hearing some really good wisdom is that there's a lot of wisdom to bootstrap, to be in a good operation, to be viable, to be, you know, to not go for the quick fix. But at the same time, if some outside company, and we're increasingly in a borderless global marketplace, decides that it wants to take out your market, and they used, you know, loaned capital or whatnot to basically saturate the market and eat up the market share, you can have a more sound balance of books. You can have more equity. You can have a better native homegrown product. But if you ain't got the customers, because someone comes in with an arsenal and just blows you away suddenly, you know, what do you got to say for it?
Yeah. So I think it's, you know, you got to think about whether or not you need funding, want funding. It's not the right thing for everybody. You are giving up equity in your company. You are taking on, there's never a silent partner, right? They've given you money. They do want their say, even if they say they're going to be silent. So it's, you know, I think it's, you know, especially that first investor, when it's still very risky for them, relatively risky for you, you know, it's almost like finding another co-founder. It's like, you got to make sure the values are aligned and that their expectation of growth matches your expectation of growth. You know, I worked with a team once where they started a company together and everything was rocking and rolling and they were killing it. And one guy was like, things are great, right? Things are awesome the way they are. Why would we want to grow? And the other guy's like, no, we're going this big. Like, we're going all the way, man. And they disagreed, right? And the company fell apart because they could, you know, they had different values of related to what success meant to them, right? And so I think when you're talking to a co-founder or even that for early stage investors, understanding making sure your idea of what success is aligned and how big that is really important.
Really good point.
Right. And ideally you want more than money, right? Ideally you want somebody that's tied into the industry or has has relationships that you don't have, right? My last company, my last company that I ran prior to relocating to Savannah on the south, that was actually before I even joined ATDC that I sold. At one point I was looking for a CEO because I couldn't find a good chief technology officer. And I'm a historically, I'm a chief technology officer. So I was like, well, I can step into CTO. Can I find a good CEO? Right. And I was in really big talks with this super senior guy at American Express. Right. And he wanted to leave this big company. Well, guess what? His Rolodex was a who's who of the financial tech industry. So I was like, woo, we're going to win this race, man. Like, yeah, bring them on. Right. So I think it's really about, relationships is really key. Like, and I guess the other thing is it's really nice, especially if you're a solo founder or you're the CEO and maybe you have a team, but they're not your peers, to have somebody with more experience or a different set of skills than you do to bounce ideas off of to use that, right? To use that relationship to grow your knowledge and your ability to get assistance, right?
Yep.
I mean, even when I've started in the past, I've had early investors interview potential candidates for key jobs for me. I mean, they're not technically going to work with that company in the weeds, but it gives me a second opinion or a third opinion on somebody that I'm thinking of hiring to make sure, like, I can't be the only person that interviews this person and hires them. So it gives you a bench. You got people on your team.
Makes sense. Well, that really sets the table. I want to ask Jen for some specifics about different stages of businesses and talking about the right kind of capital for the right stage. First, let's take a quick message from today's episode sponsor, Soul Insight.
This episode is sponsored by Soul Insights. Is your business looking to hit the next level of growth? For many businesses, they know they need to spend more on marketing, but don't want to simply shoot in the dark. They want a smart, data-driven path to solid growth. If this is you, then Soul Insights can help you to identify, attract, and retain ideal customers. Soul Insights is a strategic marketing agency which helps small and mid-sized businesses understand their best customers, who they are, their shopping behavior, and acquire new best customers based on that data. Oh, and it's all measured and tracked to ensure you get more profit bang for your marketing buck. Head to soulinsights.com right now and take the 90-second quiz to find your path to the next level.
Okay, that's a lot of information. I love that. For me, it's drinking from a fire hose. Maybe for some other folks, this is more familiar. But you talk about different funding is appropriate for different stages of the company's life. And once again, I think what we're asking you here is helping us to have better paradigms to address this apparent issue of businesses going under before they reach year 5, partially due to lack of capital. So for the startup, if they are in the first 2 to 3 years of existence, when they're funding that startup stage, what do you think is like the top kind of proverbs of funding a business that early in its life?
So I actually have a chart for this, and it's in that slide deck that I mentioned earlier. But the funding curve looks a little bit like a bell curve, right? And so in those early stages, it's going to be bootstrap. It's going to be something that nobody ever likes to talk about anymore. Friends and family rounds, right? Really
or for trendy, we can go crowdfunding. Although, obviously, you're gonna have a lot of degrees of success when it comes to crowdfunding. Everybody thinks that if they just put it out on social media, but it is a thing for some people.
Yeah, and you have to think, well, there's crowdfunding for equity and there's crowdfunding for gifts and prizes and pre-purchases, right? So there's now crowdfunding for revenue shares. So there's a new platform that does that as of a couple of months ago. So there's all different types of crowdfunding. So there's at the early stage, there's it's the more traditional route. Then there's an overlap in that phase with angel, right? Like, so with my very first startup, we raised a lot of money, and we actually had like a professional angel investor in our friends and family round, right? Now, he didn't put a lot in, but he came in at that level with some of his money that he managed from the money that he had set aside for angel investing, came in at that level, right? And then when we came to the next round, our seed round at that time, now you might go for a pre-seed round, but he came in and he really led that effort, right? And he brought other investor friends in along that round. So I think, but all of that can be within like a 2-year window, right? It's some of it depends on type of product and time to market and all that sort of stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
but it's typically going to be your own money and friends and family, maybe some angel money up front, right? And then, I think as you get to, I'll say again, product market fit or early stage customer adoption, where you start to see some revenue coming in, then you can kind of assess, depending on the type of product you're offering, what your next path is, right? If it's a pure play tech product, banks don't understand. The SBAC is not going to understand a financial model built for a SaaS company, right?
Right.
They're just not. They're not going to fund that type of business. So you're onto the angel, seed fund, equity investor, venture capital round if you're that type of product.
Right.
If you're a more traditional product where the customer acquisition costs are more better understood by a traditional banker, then you're going the SBAC route or the SBA banks and the bank route.
And that actually segues into my next question is, so when the company does get to the point where they've been in business for 3 to 5 years, they got stable, they have a good operation, they have a solid book of business, they have a decent market share. That's where maybe it sounds like you may have already started to answer the question for us is, now I think we all have in our mind from your earlier example of you can't rest on your laurels perhaps. And if you just try to bootstrap organic growth, everything, you might have some out of town guy come in and use capital to just eat your lunch out of nowhere. Once they get to that point, that's where basically off the nature of their business, they need to look at, or they should at least proactively, strategically look at traditional lines of capital or maybe VC or angel investor to be able to put more wind in the sails, more fuel to the fire, to use that as an opportunity to get extra aggressive. That way you don't leave an opening for some out of market company to come eat your lunch just because you happen to be stable and have a solid book of business.
Yeah. So I think you're looking at some sort of like sizable funding round, probably year 3 to 5, depending on how fast you scale. But I want to question the word that you used about stable, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, in today's day and age, how stable is anybody's business, right?
True.
I mean, think about, Facebook launched Threads last week, right? Like, why did they do that, right?
Right.
They totally just changed their business model, like, right?
Right.
And so the way things are moving, you've constantly got to be learning. You've constantly got to be thinking about, okay, what more should I be adding to my suite of products that I offer to my customers, right?
Yep.
And how can I meet those needs, or how can I get more customers, and right? So, use the word stable.
True.
That kind of rubbed me wrong because I don't know that anything ever gets stable. You're an entrepreneur. You're constantly thinking about what's next. You're constantly thinking about how to get more customers, how to grow the customers that you have. And that means constantly, ideating on new product lines to add, new services to add, all of that stuff. So, I think, I don't know what other word to use in stable. It's more like once you've got enough historical data in your financial systems to actually be able to go to a bank or to an investor and say, here's how here's how it works, right? Here's what my customer acquisition costs are, right? If I throw more money at this, we can scale. Like, here's how big the market is. If I throw more money at this and we get a percentage of that larger market, here's what the numbers look like now, right? So, I think, it's, for me, a lot of the things around investors that people don't really think about is it's a relationship. Whether it's a bank, like if you want a bank loan, you better have a relationship with your bank, right? If you want to find an investor, be it angel or venture capitalist, you better build relationships with those people, right? And one of the things I tell people all the time that most people are shocked about is I tell people to give, even before they take the money from the investor, to give them regular updates on your business, and on occasion, give them bad news and ask for help.
Right.
Because if you only give them good news,
Blowing smoke.
right, they're kind of
Right.
like, yeah, right, hey, you know,
Right.
like it could be like, hey, I lost a key person this week.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody that could fill this role? Here's the job description. Bad news, right? Yeah, yeah. You know, and that's going to affect our numbers, right? That person was just killing it, and we lost them this week. So I got to fill this person. I got to fill this spot. Do you know anybody? And about, you know, it is going to kind of affect my projections that I showed you a month ago because of X, right? And the best investor is going to come back with that referral to say, oh, I know exactly the right person, or let me think about it, like, right? Or they're going to come back to you and they're going to be thrilled that you asked for their advice, right? There's a saying in the entrepreneurial world: the best way to get money is to ask for advice, right? If you're asking for money, you're probably not going to get money. You're going to get advice, but if you start asking for advice, you might get money.
Right. That's a good point.
So,
no, but to your earlier point about my stable statement is, I think that's a good sobering point you made, because we entrepreneurs, we have our plans like, oh, you know, once I get to this point, you know, everything will be hunky dory because my plan will have worked out and I will have arrived, right? So you may get to a point of comfort or contentment about how the accounting and the P&Ls look, but that doesn't mean that the market outside of your four walls, which we talk about as a theme of this podcast, that there's not constantly changing opportunities and threats. And so I think that even for this region in which you and I both operate, it needs to be a change and growing paradigm where the slow Vanna days are over, and an increasingly fast-paced, versatile, dynamic, sophisticated marketplace. There is no like, we've arrived, we're now stable, everything is fine now, because like you said, if you're not constantly always looking to grow, you're leaving an opening that someone is going to attack, because this is an increasingly growing, attractive market, and there are increasingly more and more players here. So maybe there is no true point of comfort financially, capital-wise, market share-wise.
Yeah, and I look back at different milestones of my life, and I'm, you know, I think it's a personal growth thing. I mean, right? I don't know that I ever necessarily kind of slowed down in any of my startups, but when you sell a company and you get through your earnout, right? You get through your golden handcuffs, right? You sell the company and you do your time to make sure the transition happens well, and now you're done. Like, and you go, like, then the next day you have nothing to do. Right?
Yep.
You know, I've never been more depressed in my entire life than after I sold the company, the first company, right?
Yep.
There were days that I didn't get out of bed, right? My family came to visit to check on me because I wasn't answering the phone. And it was like, because I didn't have a reason to get out of bed anymore. And it was a really positive outcome. I went through a depression because I didn't know who I was anymore. So I think, you know, to me, life is about growth, right? And so, and I like to think of everything as a series of sprints, not a marathon, right?
Yeah.
So as you think about growing your business, like, how can you build in sprints? How can you be like, we're going to get to this, and then we're going to celebrate, we're going to pause, right? And then we're going to sprint again, and we're going to celebrate, and we're going to pause. Like the Creative Coast, we had a crazy couple of weeks. So right now, you know, this week and the next couple of weeks, a lot of people are taking vacations. We're cutting it down a little bit, just relaxing. But, you know, we taught a Girls Who Code program to 33 young girls last week, and held a STEM workshop for another 15 kids at the same time. And we had She Hustles that sold out for, you know, over 130 women a couple of weeks before that. And it's just been a lot. So it's like, okay, pause. Everybody regroup.
Finish that sprint.
That's the sprint's over. Take some notes. We're gonna start again, but take a week or so to recover, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll have a meeting. We'll figure out what's important and sprint again.
That's right. All right, guys. There is no such thing as cruise control. You got to be looking for the next time to hit the gas hard. So let me ask you one more question before we bring it home. I mean, I think you've already been defying convention, so to speak, throughout the interview. But when it comes to business funding, what is one commonly held belief with which you disagree?
That's a tough one. Again, I'm going to go back to the statement that I made in the beginning, where a lot of people come in. In fact, there was a time there when every single person I met was because literally, they would walk in my office and go, so how did you find out about me, this organization? And they'd be like, somebody told me you could help me get funded. Right. And that's how they found me. And so they were coming into my office for funding, and I had to dispel the myths around whether or not they were ready for funding. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is like, not all businesses should raise funding. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of them were solo founders.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And hadn't yet built a team. And they were like, well, I need to raise money to build a team. I'm like, yeah, no, not so much. Like, you actually need a team to get money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because if you don't have a team and you raise money, what happens? Right. What happens if you're walking down the street and you get hit by a bus?
Exactly. Yeah. Where does the money
Just
go?
writing $1 million check to your business and I love your business idea and I love you.
Right.
But I don't want to run that business.
Right.
I want to be the investor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a team,
right,
you're not fundable.
Right.
And then I've seen situations where somebody had a team, but they were all really junior.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I got a team. I got all these coders. I got this person. I'm like, still, like, if you got hit by a bus, which one of them is picking up the ball?
Right.
Oh, wow.
Who's the CEO in waiting? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Who's that number two? Who's the number two that's going to step in? Right.
Right.
So team is really key. Right. The second question I would ask them in these conversations would be like, okay, do you have a product? And they'd be like, no, it's just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Ideas don't get funded, at least not in this community. They might
Right.
in Silicon Valley on occasion, but the third question adds to that. Like, have you done it before? So that idea might get funded if you've done it before in Silicon
Right.
Valley.
Right.
But it's not going to get funded here.
Right.
That idea is not going to get funded here. And like, if you've done it before, you've got people to go ask for money, right? If you did a good job.
Exactly. Because you've already built the network ties, you've got the
You've already
experience,
built
you've built the
network
trust. Yes.
Like, even if you lost their money, they will often give you money.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to ask you, what did you learn from the experience?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they like that answer, they're probably going to give you money again. Because they know the game, right? They
Mm-hmm.
know. So an angel investor needs to make 21 investments to typically make a return on their investment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's Moneyball for startups, right? So they
Yep.
have to make 21. They know 80% will fail.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Out of the other 20%, they're hoping for one home run.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest are going to probably do okay.
Mm-hmm.
But 80% of the businesses that they invest in as an angel investor are going to fail.
Those are sobering stats, but I'm not surprised, but nevertheless, to hear them is quite sobering. So I very much appreciate the insights for me as a business owner. I think a lot of the folks listening were all vigorously taking notes. So I think y'all heard it from Jen. You need to fund your business. It's very important. It's not something you get together in weeks. It comes from months and months of strategic planning, and there's different phases to it. And like Jen said, she's got entire workshops that you can access on the Creative Coast website, where it's not, there are 3 maybe parent categories, but there's 20 plus ways to fund your business. The more you know, the more you can set up your organization on that journey for long-term success. So I know you've highlighted some of the Creative Coast already, and I thank you so much for joining Good Morning Market. But I guess in closing, how can folks connect with you? How can people dive right into the deep of the pool if they want to with Creative Coast and your other ventures?
Yeah, awesome. So it's thecreativecoast.org. I am Jen at thecreativecoast.org. And I will say we run an Idea Accelerator Bootcamp, which is a 12-week long program. We're going to run it a little differently this time. In the past, we've run it like every Tuesday night for 12 weeks, and it gets a little bit too much for people. We will be kicking it off in September. We're going to run it 4 Saturdays, 1 month apart. So there's still the same amount of work. There's still the homework and stuff like that, but you're going to get trained on a Saturday and then have 4 weeks to do the work, and then get back together and get trained and do the work. And it's, we start with ideation and how to validate an idea. We go deep dive into your customers, who your customer personas and who your customers are. And things like that. Then we go deep into the business model, like what does the revenue model look like? Mm-hmm. What are the costs? What are the expenses? And then we wrap it up with an investor fund your business course at the last month. We are going to allow people to register just for components of it this year. Where in the past you had to register for all 12 weeks. So if you think you're at the stage to fund your business and you want to sign up for Fund Your Business, the last program, you will need to fill out an application and likely do an interview, but we will possibly let you into that. We have not launched the application process yet because we're redoing all the curriculum based on the change instead of being every week. We hope to launch that around August 1st. So watch the creativecoast.org's website around August, the first week of August, for the announcement of these upcoming classes. But if you want to learn how to fund your business with equity or venture funding, that will be a part of Fund Your Business. We will also be bringing in folks from SBAC and things like that into this workshop to meet with businesses if you go through the whole program.
Perfect. That's exactly a great next step for all of us. I will put the website in the show notes on the podcast description. And folks, for y'all listening, if you just sign up for their emails, their email newsletter is very informative. It's the main way I like to keep up with Creative Coast programs, events, networking, resources. That's a great start. So Jen, thank you so much for joining Good Morning Market. A really awesome conversation. And I hope we all take everything you gave to us today, we put into action so we can all fund our businesses properly.
Awesome. Thanks. I really enjoyed it. Have a great day.
You too.